For months, the case of Nancy Guthrie has remained surrounded by unanswered questions. Investigators searched, friends waited, and the public wondered whether the truth would ever be uncovered. But recently, a former FBI agent made a statement that immediately caught attention. According to the agent, authorities may now be very close to making an arrest. That single sentence changed everything, because if police are close to an arrest, it means they may already know who they believe is responsible. The only question now is, who? Was it someone Nancy trusted? Someone who had been questioned before? Or someone investigators have been quietly watching all along? Tonight, we examine the details of the Nancy Guthrie mystery, the evidence investigators have been studying, and the new developments suggesting this case could soon reach a turning point. Because if an arrest is coming, then somewhere in the story lies the moment where everything went wrong. Before a case becomes a headline, it begins with a person. Nancy Guthrie was known among friends and family as someone dependable and kind. She lived a life that many would describe as quiet and steady. Those close to her often said she valued relationships deeply. She stayed in touch with friends, maintained connections with family, and rarely created conflict with anyone. To the people around her, Nancy seemed like someone whose life followed a predictable routine. Work, home, friends, family, which is exactly why what happened next felt so disturbing. Because when someone like Nancy suddenly disappears, people start asking questions. And those questions often lead investigators somewhere unexpected. Every investigation begins with a moment. The moment when someone realizes something isn't right. For Nancy Guthrie, that moment came when people close to her noticed something unusual. She wasn't responding to calls. Messages went unanswered, and her normal routine had suddenly stopped. At first, there were attempts to explain it away. Maybe she was busy. Maybe her phone battery had died. But as hours turned into longer periods of silence, concern began turning into fear. Eventually, the situation became serious enough that authorities were contacted. What began as a missing person concern quickly became an official investigation. And from the very beginning, detectives noticed something that didn't sit right. Because in many disappearance cases, there are usually signs: packed bag, a sudden trip, a clear reason someone may have left. But in Nancy's situation, investigators reportedly found no obvious explanation for why she would vanish, which forced detectives to ask a difficult question. If Nancy didn't leave voluntarily, then what happened to her? When law enforcement begins investigating a disappearance, they start with the most basic questions. Where was the person last seen? Who were they with? What was happening in their life at the time? Detectives began piecing together Nancy's final known movements. They looked at phone activity, surveillance cameras, witness accounts, digital records. Piece by piece, a timeline began to form. But timelines can also reveal inconsistencies. Sometimes, a person's memory of events doesn't match digital records. Sometimes, statements change. And sometimes, the smallest contradiction becomes the most important clue. Investigators reportedly began noticing details that required closer examination, which meant the investigation was slowly shifting from a search for a missing person to a search for answers. In most criminal investigations, detectives must examine the relationships surrounding the victim, not because guilt is assumed, but because statistically, many crimes involve someone the victim knew. This means investigators must speak with family members, friends, co-workers, neighbors, anyone who may have seen or spoken with Nancy before her disappearance. These interviews are not simply casual conversations. Detectives compare statements carefully. They analyze tone, details, and consistency. Sometimes people forget small details, but sometimes those details reveal something important. As the investigation progressed, authorities began focusing more closely on certain individuals connected to Nancy. Not publicly, but internally, quietly building a clearer picture of the situation. And that picture may have started pointing in a specific direction. Modern investigations rely heavily on digital information. Phones, messages, location data, financial activity. All of these pieces can reveal movements and interactions. Investigators likely analyzed Nancy's phone records to determine who she last contacted, where her phone was last active, and whether any unusual activity occurred. Sometimes digital evidence reveals a pattern. Other times it exposes a sudden disruption. A phone that stops moving, a location that raises questions, or communication that suddenly ends. These kinds of clues often guide investigators toward new leads, and sometimes toward individuals who need to be questioned more carefully. As time passed, speculation surrounding the case grew. When information is limited, people naturally begin asking questions. Could someone close to Nancy have been involved? Did an argument escalate into something more serious? Was there a situation investigators had not yet revealed publicly? Authorities often avoid discussing these possibilities in detail, not because they don't exist, but because revealing too much information too early can compromise a case. Instead, detectives continue gathering evidence quietly, testing each theory carefully, because making an arrest requires something very important: proof, and proof takes time. Recently, new attention returned to the Nancy Guthrie case after a former FBI agent shared an important observation. Based on experience with investigations like this, the agent suggested authorities may be very close to making an arrest. Statements like this are not made lightly. Experienced investigators understand how cases develop. They recognize the signs that indicate a case may be reaching a critical stage. If law enforcement is approaching an arrest, it often means several things have already happened. Evidence has been reviewed, witness statements have been confirmed, and prosecutors may already be involved in evaluating the case. In other words, the investigation may have reached the point where detectives believe they understand what happened, but they must ensure the case is strong enough to hold up in court. If investigators truly are approaching an arrest, the next phase of the case could move quickly. Authorities may present evidence to prosecutors, seek warrants, or prepare to question a suspect again. Sometimes arrests occur suddenly. Other times, investigators wait for one final piece of confirmation, the moment that connects every detail, the moment when uncertainty disappears. For now, the mystery surrounding Nancy Guthrie remains unresolved, but the possibility of an arrest suggests that the truth may finally be close. Somewhere within the evidence gathered over months of investigation lies the answer to a question that has haunted this case from the beginning. What happened to Nancy Guthrie? And if authorities truly are preparing to make an arrest, then the person responsible may soon be revealed. The only remaining question is one that continues to echo through this investigation. Was the truth hidden in plain sight all along? Or will the identity of the suspect shock everyone following this case? One thing is certain: this story is not over yet.